positive feedback, saturating the tape, speeding it up. So, you know, just from that one kind of pick rate across the string, you got that cool effect. He does some great stuff in quadrant 4, where it's actually done in the middle of the song. And you can do similar things with the Bucket Brigade. They're all slightly different. You know, variations on a theme. The most common tape echo is the Maestro. You can still find it. They made 2 bass ones. They made solid state bass ones. And now I think it's Full Tone, has come out with their own brand new tape echo. You know, which is you know, very expensive. It's like $1,000. You know, but it's a new thing. There's enough demand that people want tape echo. Okay. Now we're talking reverb. Reverb is kind of delayed to the extreme, right? All natural environments have some kind of reverb. Reverb is short for reverberation time, right? So if I clap in here, you hear the reverb, right? Because we've got cinder block walls, right? So we've got a decently long reverberation time in this room. If I did that in a great hall, I believe at least before they took the last acoustic modification steps, it would go for seconds. The reverberation time in a great hall used to be ridiculously long, and they toned it down a little bit in the past few years. But you know, it's a measure of how long it takes from when you create that impulse to when the sound kind of fades away. There were a number of ways of doing it, right? We talked about spring reverb with guitar amps. That was one of the common analog techniques of doing reverb. You also have plate reverbs and some other variations. And then there are digital ways of doing it, where typically you have a few early reflections, and that's kind of done with the delay. Right? So that's like the first few times it's bouncing off the walls. And then you have the additional noises where the sounds that bounce off the wall the first time are bouncing off the walls again. So that, you know, the impulse goes, it bounces off the walls, it bounces off the walls again. And eventually they get to your ear. So that's basically reverb. The new thing is what they call true convolution reverb. And again, I haven't found anybody who's willing to tell me all their secrets of their, you know, commercially available product. But my understanding of true convolution reverb is a really big amplifier filter. You know, that they sample the reverb of a given room, like the Great Hall or some concert hall, and then they process signals through it. So they use, and I've looked at some of them, what they do is they'll give you like a chirp signal or something, and you play that through a speaker from, you know, the stage, and then you record the resulting sound from the audience, and then you'll deconvolve the signal, right? You deconvolution to pull out the input, you get the impulse response, and then you can process it, you know? And I think that becomes more trackable now where memory is cheap. Again, you know, this is something that you couldn't have really done 20 years ago. So 20 years ago when they had digital reverb, they had to play games with IR filters and try and simulate this delay trail, whereas now you can store it. An example I like of some pretty extreme reverb. You know, you probably heard reverb on just about everything. A lot of guitar amps have it. But this one has great reverb on the bass drum. Coming out now. Sorry, on the snare. Hey? Yeah, I think you're right. I think it's on the drums. But the drums just playing that, you know, 1, 2, 3, 4 on the bass and snare. But it's not on the guitar, you know, it's not something applied to the whole thing. It's just on the drums. That's used to effect. And that's common in certain genres. You know, have you heard of the genre of shoegaze music? You know, reverb's used a lot. You know where shoegaze comes from? It's people with really big pedal boards that are constantly looking at this. Okay, now we talked about frequency cancellation. And the one product that uses this to its advantage is the flanger. All right, now talk a little bit about the history. The flanger, you know, where does that name come from? Flanging. I mean, what's a flange, right? You know, flange is usually, like if you look at a brake line on a car, flange is the end, the flared section. Well, if you look at an old reel-to-reel tape, right? Magnetic tape wrapped around a reel. The outer edge of that is also called the flange. So original flanging came about. What would happen is they took two reel-to-reel tape players playing the exact same thing, synced them up, which I believe that was built in, it synced up, and then they were playing the same thing back. And then if you pressed on the flange on one of them, right, you'd slow down the tape. That is basically a delay. You're introducing a delay by slowing down the tape. And as you let up on it, it would speed back up to catch back up. And this was supposedly the first example of flanging. I think the Beatles used it on Sgt. Pepper. So they had the two tape decks, and they pressed on one of the flanges, slowed it down, sped it up, and got this analog flanging sound. And it creates this very distinctive whooshy sound. And what it is you've got a certain amount of delay, and you're varying the width of the delay time by a certain amount, and the amount is called the width of the flanging. So that the delay is modulated by the LFO, which has the width, and the delay mix. And then typically you also use feedback to intensify the effect. It's still pretty noticeable without the feedback. But it takes those notches that we saw in the delay spectrum, and since you're varying the delay time, it moves the notches. So the notches kind of sweep in time. And this is very similar to the phaser, or phase shifter. In fact, my understanding was that flanging was invented with the two tape decks. But given there wasn't an easy way of doing that live, and there wasn't an easy way of creating any kind of delay, whether it be bucket brigade or digital or anything at the time, they created the phaser with the all-pass filter to simulate it. And it sounds kind of similar. But later when they had bucket brigade devices, and they could come out with the flange in the 70s, the phaser was so kind of well-loved that it stuck around. So now you can get both. And they sound similar, but slightly different. And again, how they're made is completely different. You know, the phaser is all-pass filter, and the flanger is time delay. So the parameters for the flanger are, you got the delay, which is kind of this offset minimum delay. Then you got the sweep depth, which tells you how far the delay varies. And then you've also got, of course, the frequency with which you vary. That's the speed of the LFO. Okay, so here's an example flanger. This is the Lux electric mistress, another electroharmonic. Here, it's not as pronounced as the phaser. It's a little, it's kind of hard to hear. It's a little more metallic sounding, people usually describe it. Now again, this one hasn't been calibrated in a while. I don't know if I mentioned it, but this particular pedal and a number of other electroharmonics pedals were invented by a guy named Howard Davis, who is a Cooper graduate. Really? Yeah. I run into him on some boards, and he'll actually rebuild old electroharmonics pedals and fix them up and tune them up to spec. And I found his webpage, and I found his biography, and I started reading through it. It's a New York native, I think, and then he mentioned he went to Cooper. And then he went from Cooper directly to building pedals for electroharmonics. Yeah, it is. I don't know too much about it. Well, the problem, there's a real problem with electroharmonics, I guess, I think in the 80s, where there's some union issues, where they weren't a union company, but the unions wanted them to be, but the workers were happy. I don't know exactly what happened. But electroharmonics effectively went out of business for a while. They're back now, they're making pedals. Howard Davis works as a consultant, so he does work for a lot of the pedal companies now. Very well known in the area. So some examples, flanging. There's an example, Lenny Travis. This is after the breakdown, comes back.